What's going on, guys? Carter here with Edged Mindset. Let me ask you a question. Who wants to be inside me? Huh? Any of you want to get inside of me? My mind. I'm talking about my mind here. Get your head out of the gutter. We're going to be diving into why do I like Medford knives, right? Why on God's green earth do I like Medford knives? Now, I want to caveat a couple things here. I'm not going to talk about Greg Medford. I'm not going to talk about politics. I'm not going to talk about any of that stuff. I'll touch on it briefly at the beginning. Briefly. But if you're looking for a video of me kind of diving into what I think of his politics and supporting the company and supporting him, I'm not really going to do that in this video. I am talking just about the knives here. I'm not saying those aren't valid things to discuss. I'm just saying that's not what I'm going to be talking about in this video. I don't want to talk about that in this video. So if that's what you're looking for, I would move on. 2, this is going to be kind of an exploratory rambly thing. I've got some ideas as to why I like Medford knives. Some things I've been kicking around because I've been on a Medford kick lately. And I've always kind of dabbled extensively with Medford knives. But some of this is me trying to figure it out for myself because honestly, on paper, I really shouldn't love them, right? When you look at the value for the money, the features, things like that, it shouldn't be very high on my top of list knives, and yet I, for some reason, gravitate towards them. And I can quantify, and I will quantify a lot of the reasons I like Medford knives, but some of this is just that human magic, that why do we do the things that we do? We can't always completely explain it. So there is going to be a little bit of ambiguity here. If you're expecting me to come up with a concise 10-reason list that could potentially persuade you to like Medford knives, I don't think we're going to get there. But I do want to bring up a couple things that I've noticed in myself as to why I like them. And I would like to hear your feedback on some of those reasons and things like that. So let's kick this baby off by talking about Greg Medford, the politics, all that stuff. I don't want to talk about that. For one, I like the knives, and I am kind of like, I try to separate those two things, and I know you can't completely do that. And I know that is a little bit of, burying your head in the sand, right? Because obviously by buying the knives, supporting the knives, I'm supporting Greg. Now, I don't completely disagree with Greg. So let me say that first and foremost. There's definitely some things he goes a little harder on than I think is necessary. And there's some showmanship, I want to call it, about the way he kind of approaches some of these things. I firmly believe that the true Greg isn't as wild as he's kind of coming across. I think some of that is a little bit of a tactic on his part to get attention and kind of notoriety and kind of rile up some juices. I have a tendency to do that on this channel. I will post stuff that I know is going to be somewhat inflammatory, just because I'm a bit of an agent of chaos. When things get a little too normy, I have a bad habit of stirring things up. But I could be wrong on that. I could be completely wrong on that. But I want to separate him from the company. The other thing is, he is the leader of the company. I understand that. But he also is just one person in the company. Greg Medford Knives is a whole thing. Not only the people he's sourcing materials from, right? Buying titanium, buying machines, all of those things, but there are dozens of employees that work for that company of who knows what their political stance is. I have no idea, right? And so for me to kind of punish them by not supporting a company because of their boss, I don't know. It just doesn't sit well with me. But the main reason is I just don't want to talk about it. It's not the point of the video. So let's move on. Let's get into the knives of why do I like these things? What is it about them? Because I think there's some objectively great things about them, but then there's some things that are like, Oh, a third thing I want to bring up on this. For better or for worse, I'm a very honest person. And I don't, some people will find this hard to believe. I don't put blinders on. Like when I like a company or I like a thing, I don't put blinders on. I don't sit here and say, this is the best knife ever, and I'm just going to ignore the weird reasons why I like them or the reasons I shouldn't like them. I will call those out. And it makes people mad because people tend to want black or white. Like if they see a Medford video talking about why I love Medford knives, they're expecting a 100% unapologetic, these are the best knives ever. And so then to hear me point out things or make fun of myself for liking certain things. They don't like that. It gets them upset. Gets them really upset. That's one of the things on my channel I've noticed is people do not like that. They want to know what they're going to get and what the stance is going to be, and they want it to be unwavering, even for dumb things like what knives I like. Because at the end of the day, this is stupid. I don't need any of these. I have more knives than any person could ever need. I can pass these off to my family, and they can pass them off to their families and still have way more knives. I buy these because I enjoy them. I enjoy buying, selling, trading. I enjoy getting the next thing. I appreciate the aesthetics. I appreciate the machining, all of that stuff. So let's get to number one. The designs. Let's start with designs. I really like Greg Medford's designs, and I've talked about this before. The Praetorian is just a banger, right? It is just a good silhouette. I mean, I'll just leave it at that. This is one of those kind of legacy designs right here, especially the drop point for me anyways. I know the Tanto is kind of like the OG and the more common, but the drop point is, I don't know, it's just, I'm not going to say perfect. It's a really solid design. I do put this on the same pedestal as like the Strider design, just talking like design silhouette, right? Nothing else, not the company, not people involved, just the design. I put this on the same pedestal as like an SMF. I think it is absolutely cool. Now, the other designs aren't as strong. However, they're stronger than they have any right to be. The way Greg designs, they're just off kilter enough to be interesting, right? When you get into the knife world, you know, you may see something that's got, you know, whatever, rock pattern, or you know, it's got a clip point blade and diamond texturing, but there's certain unspoken rules that knife designers tend to kind of follow. And you may not notice it, but it's a common thread through a lot of designs where there's certain design choices that are just transplanted from one to the next. And it's something, like I said, you don't necessarily consciously see it until you come across, you know, a knife that kind of bends those rules a little bit. You know, like some of the decisions being made here, kind of the thinness of this lock bar, how high up it is, right? There's just a lot of, and these aren't even the biggest examples, right? Like I don't have any of the really wild Medford designs. Mine are all pretty basic. But it's because Greg is not a knife guy by history, right? He got into the knife game as a business. In fact, he's admitted that he wanted to do pew-pews originally, but that's very difficult. There's obviously laws, regulations, all kinds of things you have to have in place, not to mention the fact that the big legacy brands are kind of ruling the roost, right? They don't want people eating from their chili bowl, and they're going to make it very difficult for newcomers to come in. Not impossible, but difficult. He saw that and was like, man, I don't know if I want to deal with all that. And so he saw this kind of overbuilt military style knife trend, and he thought, hey, there's an idea. You know, I can do that. I can flex my machining prowess and start making these knives. And that's what he did. And he admittedly did not look at, buy, or get other knives to design his stuff. Now, obviously, things are going to filter through. But these knives, especially the early ones, were really designed from somebody that didn't have these established rules. And so, you know, obviously there's certain mechanics of a knife that just has to be the way it is in order for it to function, you know, frame locks. There's certain rules you can't break. But Greg was able to bend some of the other rules, and it kind of created these knives that were just a little bit off. You know, they almost looked like, I remember seeing the first Medford knives, and I was kind of thinking, does that thing even fold? You know, does it like function? And they do, right? From an engineering standpoint, they fully function, but they're just executed a little bit off. Now, some people didn't like that, but I did, because it was refreshing and it was different. You know, it kind of gave a different sort of feel to these things. You know, for example, this flipper tab is a wild choice, right? Like, and you could argue it's a wild choice for a reason, but these kind of things make these knives interesting to me, right? You know, now, will I say this is the best flipper design, you know, because it sticks way far out there? No. It's a little obtrusive. It's a little much, but it's a cool frickin' knife to have in my collection. I love this thing. I love that flipper tab. It's different. It functions. It's very, very cool. And that kind of is the thread of Greg Medford's knives to me, is designs that are just a little odd enough to be interesting, but still fully functional. Moving on to fully functional, Greg is one of those people that have, I'm going to stop saying, okay, Medford Knives is one of those companies that have, I know I'm contradicting myself, right? I say he's just one person, and yet I'm calling him out by name every single time, just because it's stuck in my head. Medford Knives, because it's a collaborative effort, especially now. Medford Knives has continued to improve their quality, right? They were a little bit sticklers at first with like centering, right? They were kind of anti pretty boy knives, and they're like, oh, it functions, that's good enough. But at the end of the day, they have improved, and they've listened to customer feedback, and they've continuously increased the value of their knives, right? Adding lock bar stabilizers, carbonizing the lock face to get rid of stick, fixing the machining so that their knives are perfectly centered, making everything tight as a drum. And that is one of the things, moving on to the next category, similar to design, but a little bit different. There is a feel to Medford's. The smoothness on those washers are just different than other knives. And the way that everything clicks together is just really satisfying. Now, I know a lot of people don't give a crap about that. That is a definite peripheral type of cool, right? We're not talking about how the knife functions. We're talking about weird tactile sounds and feelings. But for me, like I said, for somebody that has more knives than any one person could ever actually need or use, these are the things that grab my attention. I love the way the detents work on Praetorian tees, especially. Just that click. How tight everything is. No detent lash. No pivot lash. Lockups are done so well. The geometry of the lockups are outstanding. The amount of contact you're getting on the lock face is outstanding. Just really, really cool. And then along with that too, despite the fact that these are kind of overbuilt-y, crazy big knives, Greg has always used, okay, I'm not going to say always. Medford Knives has predominantly used hollow grinds and get a remarkably thin edge for such beefy, overbuilt knives, and they always come razor sharp. So despite the fact that you could look at this thing and say it's a behemoth, there's no way it could cut, these cut well, considering, right? Considering. I mean, obviously, if this was a full flat grind, thinner blade stock, yeah, it's going to slice better. But all things considered, they're designed well as cutting tools within the scope of them being thick, overbuilt, strong knives, if that makes sense. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say this can compete with an Oz Rosie or other such slicey knives. That's not their intent. What I'm saying is they are deceptively good cutters based on what you're seeing here. And that kind of plays into the fact that, you know, Medford Knives isn't necessarily coming from a traditional knife background, but they take manufacturing and they take making knives very seriously. And I appreciate that. I really, really appreciate that. The other thing, and this is, so I think those are pretty reasonably justifiable. Here's another one, USA made, right? These are made in the US. You know, the company is very pro-US, meaning not only are they making and assembling these knives, they try to purchase USA for obviously all of their materials, but also as much of the machinery as makes sense, as possible, they buy from the US. Now, let me caveat this. This is not, me saying that is not like some blind patriotic type weird thing. This is me just wanting to support my community, right? I think of the people involved in the company. I think of the people involved in manufacturing and distributing and selling the tools and machinery used by the company. I mean, these are neighbors, right? These people have families, they have kids, right? I think of, you know, my kids' friends and their parents and what they do. This is not coming from some blind patriotic, you know, America's the best, you know, USA, bald eagle. This is just coming from me enjoying supporting my fellow people, me helping people get jobs so that they can get educations and they can buy food and they can get a house. Greg is pretty adamant with his company that he wants to provide good wages for his employees. Now, I don't know if that's true. I don't know what that means to Greg. I don't know what those numbers, right? I have no idea, but that at least is what he's stating, right? He wants to have a company that can support USA families. And once again, this is purely coming from supporting my community, right? Traditionally, I'm in the software industry. So creating software, right? I'm not necessarily like a super techie guy, but I'm involved in the software industry. And there's been a lot of outsourcing of developers, right? Because it's cheaper to outsource. And these are kids graduating college that now can't get jobs. These are families that have to start delivering pizzas, right? Grown people with families that are not that there's anything wrong with pizzas, but when you've kind of set up a lifestyle, not even a lifestyle, just livable wages and things like that. It decimates it, right? It does. It just puts money in the company's pocket and it takes it out of the people working for that company. And it's the same thing here, right? And I'm not anti-overseas knives. I feature tons of them, lots of them, and I appreciate them. They're marvels of engineering. But I do like to support American people when I can, when it makes sense. And it is a factor as to why I like these knives. Not the only one. But it is a factor, is supporting USA workers, supporting my fellow neighbors, things like that. All right, now we're going to move into kind of the less quantifiable things. And that is, I'm older, right? I'm older. And so just like people will always have a sweet spot for music they listen to in high school, I've got a sweet spot for the knives that were breaking ground when I first got into them. And that was overbuilt titanium military folders. No matter how much I try to run from it, no matter how much I try to say, that's old school, there's better stuff now, micromilling, bearings, all these things. These kind of knives just have a certain spot in my heart. And I really can't, if you don't have that, you just don't have that. I can't convince you that you should like this knife if you don't have that just external thing, right? That just, I don't know. You just like it because you like it, right? I have that in spades. And because of that, I've got a sweet spot for flat titanium scales, and it's not that I don't appreciate contoured micro milled scales objectively. You grab one of those and you're like, wow, that feels really comfortable. The amount of work and machining involved to do that. But for me, I don't know, there's something about flat scales that just has a special place in my heart. And Medford fills that void in spades, right? In fact, I don't know if they have contoured handles, but they're kind of cheating, right? They're not fully contoured. They're just kind of extra beveled edges. I don't know if they have any true contoured handles, and I don't care because I like that they do flat scales. I like this simplistic kind of chunky industrial look to these things, unrefined in a lot of cases. But then I like how, okay, here's the other thing that I really enjoy about Medford knives. I like the hand finishing type finishes. I love the Vulcan finishes. I love things like this, right? Where this pattern is going to be different on every one of these versions because these things are done by hand. And it's just something you don't get in a lot of modern knives, that are very machine only, repeatable kind of things. I like the matte style finishes that are used with these kind of textures. I'm a very textury type person. I don't like a lot of shine and things like that. There's just something I enjoy about it, right? And there's a reason why, there's fake Praetorians, there's clones of Praetorians, but they're pretty obvious. They are pretty obvious because it's not cost effective for companies to copy things like this Vulcan finish. Could they do it? Yeah, it just wouldn't be cost effective. and they would have to charge more than it would make sense for copying a knife like that. So the only like Medford fakes are kind of just the all stonewash ones, right? The things that don't require any of that hand touch, any of that kind of canvasy artistry, where you just machine the knife and you throw it in a tumbler and then that's it. And I feel like, a lot of modern knives are a lot easier to make fakes of because they're fully machined. And guess what? These other countries making fakes, they can have the same machines that we have here. All they do is program them and it outputs essentially the same knife, barring some minor differences. I like the hand-finished kind of artistry of some of the stuff that they're doing, but that's just me. I don't think that is popular for everybody. It is somewhat not in vogue right now. People like the micromilling, they like the bearings, they like the lock bar insert, they like the featherweightness. This is not a featherweight knife. Now, all that being said, I can't deny that there are things that I'm like, okay, why do I like these? Because at the end of the day, all of these knives are slabs of titanium screwed together, right? Not a lot of innovation, not a lot going on. Medford tries to mask that fact with sculpting and surface finishes and things like that. But at the end of the day, all of these knives are like, this one has G10, but they're just slabs of material screwed together, right? They're very blocky, they're very chunky. And as much as I like the aesthetic of like the flat scales, like I mentioned before, at the end of the day, they're all just kind of like that, just different sizes and, a little bit different handle shape and things like that. So I can't deny that, right? Look at these two, right? Essentially the same, but just big, chunky slabs of G10 on the front there, flat scales, chamfered on the edges. You've got some, you've got some jimping cut into it, but they're all very quite similar. Now you could say the same argument for kind of modern knives, right? They all kind of start to blend together in a lot of ways. But TLDR, I like the hand finishing of these knives. I like the big, chunky, old school style. I always will, right? I always will like big, chunky, heavy knives. And I like the simple shapes. I like the slight bending of kind of design rules that we've gotten so accustomed to. I like all of those things, and I like supporting American companies when I can. I'm not a stickler, right? I'm not like one of those guys that are going to be out on his porch waving a flag saying buy only American. But when it makes sense for me to do so, it will kind of get me to spend more of my dollars in that company than maybe another company that doesn't do that. It is a factor. I like to support my fellow countrymen, right? Help them have lives, help them start college accounts, that kind of stuff. So that's it. Medford knives. Something about them. I like them. I like the way they feel. I like the way they sound. There's lots of things I don't like about them as well. And it's a shame because I really wish I could just go all in on the company, but there are a few things holding me back, I guess. Although you could look at this and say, well, what if you not going all in is buying all of these, then what is going all in? I don't know. I don't have an answer to that question, but all right, comment down below. What do you think about the concepts that I've said? Not necessarily Medford, but just kind of my line of thinking and the concepts that I went through. I'm curious to see how this video went over. I don't know. It's a mixed bag. It's always 50-50 if I regret making and publishing a video like this or not. So, all right, guys, thanks for hanging in there. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Take care. I'm out.